You're listening to Soundrise Podcast, a show hosted by Aleks in Serbia and Vlada in Poland.
Each week we cover a different artist or band and engage in open spontaneous debates and discussions about specific parts of their discographies. Our goal is to expand our musical horizons and cover a great range of genres and styles.
Find us on Patreon, patreon.com/soundrisepod, and on social media @soundrisepod.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Soundrise Podcast. Hello Aleks, how are you doing?
Hello Vlada, good afternoon to you. I'm doing really good. Hope you're doing well as well. I'm excited about this episode because it's special in a way, because the last episode was our Patreon episode, and today we are doing a similar thing. Can you kind of introduce our listeners to this idea, Vlada?
Yes, so Aleks and I decided to revisit some of our Patreon's suggestions because there were very cool suggestions that didn't win in our monthly poll. So we decided to make sure that all our patrons know that we think about them and that their suggestions are important to us. And another thing is that their suggestions are really cool, even the losing ones. And this one in particular is awesome. And today's band was suggested originally by our dear patron and collaborator, David. So, David, thank you so much for this suggestion. This is a phenomenal act. And Aleks, will you tell us something about which band we're talking about today?
Of course, Vlada. Even though this idea didn't win in the poll, it doesn't take away anything from it. David is a great music aficionado. He has a radio station, an internet radio station. So, guys, newenglandradio.net. Check him out. He has podcasts and original music. I highly recommend listening to his station. So, the band for today is called Cold Blood. Now, when I first heard that name, I hadn't known about it before, but when I heard about it, I thought that it was like a rock/metal band. But in
Oh,
fact,
really?
it's
That's
yeah, like
interesting.
Cold Blood
Actually,
didn't really.
sorry to interrupt you, but actually, while
Yeah.
I was listening to these records on Deezer, there was another band by the same name, and it
Mm-hmm.
was actually a new metal band called Cold Blood. So you weren't like too far off in your assumptions, but it's still a bit funny.
Yeah, it's funny. I just wonder how they got this name. But all right, Cold Blood. It's actually an R&B horn funk band. Dear listeners, this is really interesting. It's a band that was formed in 1969 in San Francisco, in Oakland, California. You may know that Vlada is a big bandwagoner of Golden State Warriors, so there's a nice connection here, I would say.
Sorry, but I'm also a huge sucker for late 60s, mid 60s San Francisco Bay Area bands. You
Yeah.
know, Grateful Dead, Quicksilver Messenger Service, Jefferson Airplane, awesome bands there. And this is
Some of
maybe,
them covered on our show, by the way.
oh, yeah, of course. So check out some of the previous episodes. But I won't interrupt you anymore. Please continue.
No worries, mate. All right, so as I said, formed in 1969 in California, it was formed by guitarist Larry Field, the guitarist, the original lead guitarist of this band. And it's interesting because this band is really known for their vocalist Lydia Pence, and sometimes the name of the band is actually the band is referred to as Lydia Pence and Cold Blood because of her huge stature in this band, so to say. The band first came to prominence in 1969 when the rock impresario Bill Graham signed them after an audition. What's interesting about this is that, first of all, Lydia Pence has been many times compared to Janis Joplin. And Janis Joplin was the one who recommended this audition to Bill Graham. That's really interesting, sorry. This band is, given their geographical position, it is associated with the East Bay Grease term. That's a term that describes the San Francisco Bay Area's horn sound, horn funk sound. And some of the other bands from that scene are Tower of Power, Chicago, and some other bands.
Yeah, awesome acts, right? Really
Right,
amazing acts.
that's a good scene to discover, definitely. This band disbanded in the late 70s, and that's because Lydia Pence suspended her music career in the early 80s because she wanted to raise her daughter Danielle. But fortunately, this band came back to the scene in the late 80s and early 90s, and still nowadays they're active, they're touring, releasing albums. They've gone through a lot of lineup changes, and interestingly enough, well, it's not really a surprise, but some of the Tower of Power band members also regularly play with Cold Blood. So they've released a lot of records. As you know, guys, we only discover and talk about three bands of three albums. That is, and we're now gonna start with the self-titled album called Cold Blood, which was released in 1969. So a great year. Vlada, I want to hear your thoughts first.
All right, so first of all, I have to say that this band is somewhat overlooked, in my opinion. I first heard about them a couple of years ago when I visited my dear friend and a huge music aficionado and one of the biggest record collectors in Serbia, Vlada Milanovic from Jagodina. And he played some of this stuff to me. And I remember he told me how this band was criminally overlooked, mainly because the lead singer was often seen as a copy of Janis Joplin, which I think really does her a huge disservice. And we will talk more about that, of course, as we go along. Um, but first of all, I have to say that when I first heard this band, I was really amazed at how well everything sounded, how powerful the lead vocals were, how tight the band was. And now, revisiting this music, I got, of course, the very same impression. And especially this debut record, I think, is a great statement. It's mostly covers here, so not a lot of original stuff. Another reason why I think this band was probably overlooked, that they weren't really big on writing their own songs. On the subsequent records, that they have their own material, but it's not as strong as some of the covers. But here, as a record of covers, this works perfectly well. Um, Very strong from the get go. Only 7 cuts, which I think is a good thing because each cut takes some space for the players to show off their chops, their instrumental prowess. The record starts auspiciously with "I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free," a great civil rights anthem that many people know and associate with Nina Simone, another amazing singer that I hope we will cover in one of the future episodes. But this is also a great version, a great song to showcase Lydia's vocals. And what I really loved was the rhythm section. I thought the bass player was just out of this world. Alexander, as a fellow bass player, what did you think about bass playing on this record overall?
Not just on this record, but the bass playing is absolutely the highlight of this band. Absolutely a strength. So I was thoroughly impressed with it. But I just can't take anyway. I just think I just can't take anything away from the rest of the band instrumentally speaking. They're just so well played. But yeah, the rhythm section is definitely really really good, Vlada.
You know what I really like about this first record is that while everything sounds so professional, there's still a lot of grit to it. You know, it's like a real gritty, nitty, funk, blues, R&B band there, and it's just phenomenal. Especially, for example, the cover of "Muddy Waters." I Just Want to Make Love to You. Actually, I'm not sure if Muddy recorded it first, but if you recall our Muddy episode, that was one of Muddy's highlights. And here there's a really great version as well. Um, I love the way the guitar comes in, and I'm so impressed with guitar players on these three records. And another thing that I wanted to say is how often when we talk about 60s music, there are all these well-known names, guitar heroes, but I feel that a lot of the best guitar players are rarely spoken about, and some of them are kind of just buried in all these not perhaps not obscure records, but still, it seems like a lot of this playing, a lot of these musicians are somewhat overlooked, and I feel that it's a huge injustice. So let me just check out who the guitar player is on this one. So you mentioned, I think, somebody in your intro, but I did not remember.
Yeah, Larry
Okay, Larry
Field, the founder
Fields.
of the
Yes,
band.
Larry Fields. So absolutely stunning, beautiful guitar playing. Um, the horn section, nothing to add there. I think you mentioned really, really powerful. So
It's
right
kind
from
of sad that when you look at the personnel list on Wikipedia, nobody has their own page except Lydia Pence. That's sad.
yeah, and that's the thing. So of course, as I mentioned, it might be due to the fact that there wasn't a lot of original material, but I also think that it's rare that you hear such a well oiled machine of a band, and it's not just that, because that sometimes bands just sound too perfect for their own good, but in this case I think there's a certain grit to it, and definitely a great debut record. So Alexander, anything to add here?
There's a very interesting fact here, and even mind blowing, I would say. I didn't know that this album was full of covers, but after listening to it, my main impression was that they sound like a good cover band. And I could recognize some of the songs, like "I Just Want to Make Love to You." I could recognize that it's a Muddy Waters song. The rest of the songs, I'm not really familiar with them, but the whole band kind of sounded that way, I would say. I wasn't as impressed as you were, Vlada. First, because they sounded like, as I said, a cover band, maybe like a James Brown cover band in some ways. I can't complain about the instrumental thing, the instrumental part of the band. I think they're really, really good at playing their instruments and creating the atmosphere and creating the groove, which is really important in funk music, as we all know. The horns are just so dominant here. If you guys are into horns as instruments, this is definitely a band you should listen to. I have to say one thing, and I'm kind of afraid because if I say it, I think our listeners will be very angry. Some of our listeners won't like this, Vlada. Should I say it?
Of course, we've already heard enough travesties of you, so we're kind of numb at this point. So go ahead.
Okay, that's the saving grace here. Okay, so I thought that this album would be better off without Lydia's vocals. In some,
Stop. How would it
in
be better off without her vocals? What's
because this is okay. I'm now gonna shield myself with this argument. This is purely subjective because as good as she is as a vocalist, as dominant as her singing is, I just don't like it. In this with this particular record, I'm not talking about the band as a whole. In this record, I just didn't. I just wasn't into her singing, and whenever they started, these instrumental loops and improvisation and solos and stuff, I could thoroughly enjoy those parts. But apart from that, her singing, I don't know, sounded like a copy. Sounded like she was trying to imitate someone, which is Janis Joplin, as we know.
I don't know. I
Um,
mean, she does sound a lot like Janice, but I don't think it was necessarily out of the desire to imitate her. I think it was just because they both had that strong, soulful, kind of raspy voice. I think a lot of it is a coincidence. I honestly think that Lydia has a sound of her own. It's just so reminiscent of Janice that some people might think of it that way. And it's her vocals that dominate the record. And I also feel like she's not really a carbon copy of Janis Joplin's. I think that they sound a lot alike, mostly because they have a similar kind of vocal style that is very raspy and powerful. And I feel like if you listen to it a bit longer, you get the idea that Lydia has her own style, which is very distinctive and very impressive at that. I don't think I've heard a lot of vocalists with that kind of range and that kind of formidable strength. So I would definitely say that I disagree with you 100%. And I do love the rest of the band. Of course, the instrumental breaks are, as you mentioned, fantastic. I need to point out how much I love organ on these records, especially on this first record. The organ and the guitar work in such a perfect unison. But dear listeners, please don't listen to Alexander. Yes, she does sound a lot like Janice, but I think
Like a copy, like a clear copy.
she does deserve her own fame. And to cite my friend who I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, he told me that it's a pity that people kind of dismiss them because while she does sound a lot like Janice, she's certainly one of the best vocalists of her era. And I definitely agree. And another thing is that definitely the covers on this record, while immaculately performed, do take away from this band a bit in a sense because at the time there were a lot of bands playing their own music. So if you didn't have your own stuff, it was very difficult for you to compete. However, a lot of bands, including Grateful Dead, had debut records that were filled with covers, and at the time it was pretty normal. It was almost like an art of sorts that got lost in the process, the art of being a cover band. And I think for my money's worth, this was an excellent 60s cover band that did offer very cool interpretations of well-known tracks. So we will see later on that the band moves on from being just a mere cover band, but here on this record, uh, it really works. I think the Stones themselves had a record that was filled with covers at the beginning, so I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but it does take something away.
To justify my statements and my opinions, here's a song from this album that kind of captures everything that I'm talking about. Watch Your Step. Okay, this track has a great simultaneous guitar and bass riffs. Really, really good. Great instrumental work and a nice groove, as we know. But Lydia just sounds like James Brown. I don't know. She just sounds like some of the records that we covered um, a few weeks back on
But
our show, Vlada.
Alexander, listen, this is R&B and soul music, and there are certain tropes. That's the thing. Sometimes people don't like these genres because they may seem too repetitive. Because there are certain tropes, and very often singers sound alike, players sound alike because they follow a certain pattern. And
I get it.
yeah, so it's like blues, like a lot of bluesmen sound alike. That's simply how it is. But there is something unique about her performance. There is something unique about this band in general, I feel, especially on this record. Uh, so I just feel like I'm with you to an extent. I do feel like that some of it is not very original, but the performances themselves are very compelling, and that's why I think it's worth a visit. It's worth if you're a soul fan, if you're an R&B fan, visit these records, take a listen. You know, you might be pleasantly surprised.
Fair enough, Vlada. I mean, my last verdict here is that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't too impressed with this because we recently did a James Brown episode. It's some In some moments, it felt like we were doing a back-to-back James Brown episode. But that's maybe just a temporary thing.
I think this was quite different from James Brown. I think while yeah, of course you had horns and all that stuff, but James Brown had I feel a much more original approach to R&B and funk.
Totally agree. That's something where I can agree with you, Vlada. Finally, all right.
All right,
Oh,
so before we move on to our ratings, we would like to share a few words about our special new sponsor.
Brown Dog Promos is a champ in the promotional products industry, having shipped all over the world since 1989. For over 30 years, Brown Dog Promos has supplied custom printed promotional items like mugs, pens, calendars, embroidered or screen printed clothing, and anything else you could possibly need to companies and groups of all sizes. They also pride themselves on working with nonprofits to raise funds and recognize key donors and volunteers. For commercial clients, Brown Dog Promos offers invaluable advertising and marketing guidance based on their 3 decades in the business. Whether you're looking to promote your company, nonprofit organization, or any variety of branding and marketing, Brown Dog Promos can make it happen.
for all of your custom printed sportswear, decals, labels, and corporate gifts, be sure to check out Brown Dog Promos by following them on Instagram under their handle Brown Dog Promos, liking their page at facebook.com/browndogpromos, or visiting their website browndogpromos.com. Trust the top dogs, Tony and Matthew, to help you make your branding outstanding.
So, Alexander, what do you think? What rating would you give to this record?
Okay, so dear listeners, after hearing some of my comments and some of my impressions, you can kind of guess that I'm not gonna give it a super high rating. I think this album is a 7 out of 10. I think they are good cover band, great instrumentation, and great atmosphere. Not a fan of the singing. It's purely subjective, so please don't be so harsh on me after this episode. And my highlight track here is I'll go with Watch Your Step.
All right, so to be fair, I kind of agree with your rating. While I don't think I'm as critical of the record as you are, I can't really find many flaws with the music itself. I just feel that it's not the most original piece of work, but it's very exciting to listen to it because of the great vocals, because of the great instrumentation, arrangements, beautiful sound. I love the way it was produced. I love the sound of the bass and drums. And maybe I'll give it 7.5. I'll just up it a bit. I wouldn't give it an 8, mainly because of the reasons I stated. I feel like 8 should be reserved for bands and music that's more original and more adventurous. So that's the only thing that would stop me from giving it an 8.
Alright, Vlada, good. So let's move on to the next record from 1972. It's called First Taste of Sin. Another name that kind of sounds like a rock or a metal band or something for some reason. But let me hear your thoughts first.
All right, so here, this is their third record. I think we skipped one. I'm actually really looking forward to listening to that one that we skipped. It might be a great record for all we know. So here, the band kind of continues in the same vein, but now they actually do their own stuff too. But the problem, I think, with their own stuff is that it's not really distinguishable from the covers. So it's really good, but it's not the best example of songwriting. It's just basically following the usual tropes. So I wasn't more impressed by this record compared to the debut. I actually think that, for better or worse, the debut record was slightly better than this. But they pretty much continue in the same style. And if you like this kind of music, it's a great record to listen to. Again, I really liked, and that's the irony. The best track for me here was "Lo and Behold," which is a James Taylor cover, and this is a great track of James Taylor's, and I really enjoy this arrangement because originally it's just done in this typical folky style with an acoustic arrangement, that sweet James Taylor voice. But here, it's done in this full R&B arrangement with the organ, with a very tight rhythm section, and I love how the band ups the intensity when they go into the chorus there. I'm really happy to have heard this rendition. I think it really adds to the original song. So they are obviously a great cover band, and there's nothing wrong about it, and this shows. So if you heard this song before, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners have, take a listen to this version and let us know what you think about it. Is this a great James Taylor cover, or maybe it's not up your alley for one reason or another? But Alexander, what are your thoughts? Do you think that having more original songs here changed the band for the better?
Yeah, Vlada, actually, I thought that this album was a slight improvement over the previous one. Just because it has more depth, it has more originality. I like the fact that now they had some different lyrics, obviously their own lyrics. Um, I think instrumentally speaking, they're still really good, but this album definitely sounds slightly different. Overall, not a huge improvement, I would say, and not something that would blow my mind necessarily. Some of the songs sounded really good. I loved the end of the song Lo and Behold, where you have this riff that starts to kind of continue. It continues to the next song. It continues to the song called Down to the Bone. It has a really, really nice riff that kind of leads the listener into the next track. And I love the part with the percussion in this song, Down to the Bone. But the rest of the record, I'm not too sure, man. I'm not too sure because some of the songs are kind of forgettable. I can praise the final track, Valdez in the Country. Great instrumental work there. The rest of the songs,
But that's also a cover. You see, it seems like all the highlights are covers. Okay, Down to the Bone was their own track, and a really good one at that. But the rest that you mentioned, I think, yeah, you mentioned this one, that's a cover.
yeah, Valdez in the Country. It's a good, but as you said, it's a cover. So there you go. We just cannot ignore the fact that they are a good cover band. Um, when it comes to the
A
other tracks,
great cover band. Sorry, but this is a great cover band. Like, if you heard this band somewhere out in a bar or so, you would be so blown away. You would be talking about it for weeks. That's the thing. I honestly feel while listening to this music that this would be a phenomenal show if you caught this band somewhere. They just sound so good. Like the instruments, the chemistry, the vocals. Everything is so alive. You almost feel like you're in the room with the band.
that's a fair point. And I think that's probably the reason why they still tour nowadays. Like 50 plus years, they're still active in a somewhat different lineup, but they are still alive, so to say. I just wanted to finally say regarding the rest of the tracks, You Had to Know, a cheesy ballad. All My Money was a good, fast paced, kind of rhythmic song, but that's it. That's it, in my opinion. I can praise the originality, that touch of their own work. It's good, but it's kind of disappointing that we are still praising their covers. So this band needs a slightly different approach, so to see. Probably an approach that is different to mine at this moment, Vlada. So that's my final verdict here.
I just feel that I don't want to take that against the band because what I like about the 60s and that it was all about the music, and sometimes the musicians wouldn't really care about their own egos so much. Of course, I'm not talking about these grand acts with egomaniacs. I don't want to mention names, but I'm talking about the acts like this one. A lot of these bands were more about music, about playing music, enjoying it, having that interaction with the crowds. So I don't want to take the lack of impressive songwriting against this band because a lot of this original material is fine. It's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong about it. Even though I have to say, I feel like the first record, which was mostly, I guess, all covers, right, did seem more memorable to me. But that might be just me, because you said that this was a slight improvement. So we definitely have different takes on that one. But then again, all I'm trying to say is, I guess, that this band deserves attention despite the fact that they may not have impressive songwriting.
Okay, that's a good point. I can partially agree with you, Vlada. All right, so let's get to our ratings and our standout tracks. So my rating here is kind of similar to the rating of the previous record. I'm kind of between 7 and 7.5, but since I said that it's a slight improvement, I'll say 7.5. And my standard track here is I'll go with the original one, Down to the Bone.
All right, that's a great track. I agree. I will give it. I think it's slightly worse than the previous record, but I'll still give it 7.5. I think, as for the highlight, I think Lo and Behold for me, as I previously stated. Even though I really loved Down to the Bone, I also liked Donny Hathaway covers, Valdez in the Country, and You Had to Know. I think Donny Hathaway perhaps should be on the list of the artists that we want to talk about in the future. A very interesting soul singer, a legendary soul singer for some, and here Lydia and the band deliver great versions. Again, I'm really glad that we covered this band, and this is definitely a very enjoyable record to listen to. So, uh, with that being said, I think we should now move on a bit up in years to 1974, and another interesting album called simply Lydia, and she's on the cover of the.
Let's say it's a self-titled record, so to say.
Yeah, you can see her eyes on the cover, a bit of a diva kind of cover. And I think Lydia definitely deserved to be considered a music diva with that kind of vocal prowess, with that kind of presence that she had. And now this record, I also feel, is a bit of a departure from the previous ones. This one was produced by none other than Steve Cropper, the legendary soul and R&B guitar player from the Booker and the MGs. So that itself sounds promising, but the sound of this record is somewhat different. Wouldn't you agree, Aleks?
I would agree, and I have to say now that this is actually the album that I thoroughly enjoyed. I actually enjoyed listening to this album. Um, I thought, first of all, that instrumentally speaking, we know that they're good, but I feel that this album was on another level. I have to say, I don't know if it's up to the producing qualities or something, but it definitely sounded better to me. I thought the riffs were catchier and just just suited my taste better. Um, I have plenty of songs here to highlight, and plenty of positives. However, towards the end of the album, I kind of got lost. I have to say, I don't know why. Maybe it was due to my mood or something.
I had the exact same impression. I think that uh, my theory is that the songs, the material sounds too alike. And again, because of the aforementioned R&B tropes, there's only so much you can take at once. So sometimes you feel like you're listening to the same tracks over and over again. But on the upside, I think it's a very immaculately produced record. I really love the sound here. The bass is so well pronounced.
So fat,
The
so groovy.
horns, oh my god, the horns here, just out of this world, especially on tracks like Under Pressure. I love those little soul horn riffs. Just amazing. You can tell that this was produced by Steve Cropper. Now, the downside is that perhaps this one sounds a bit too slick. I mentioned how the previous records were more gritty, like you had that great presence. musical instrumental presence, but the arrangements were grittier. And this one sounds more mid 70s, very slick, very almost kind of yacht rock sort of thing. But still, I don't think it's a big minus. I still admire the band here so much. Again, the guitars. I think it's a different guitar player here, but whoever it is, I was blown away by his playing. So professional, so um, the notes were so carefully placed. The solos, the licks, the organ playing as well. So again, the biggest downside is what you mentioned, that the songs kind of peter out near the end.
Yeah, probably because they just sound too alike, and you kind of hear, you know, in the first 4 or 5 tracks, you hear basically the whole record, and towards the rest of the record, it kind of, it's kind of the same. It's kind of a repetition, but I have to agree about this track, Under Pressure. First of all, I really like the political lyrics there. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that the main riff here reminds me of Superstition by Stevie Wonder. Did you have the same impression, Vlada?
To be fair, I didn't really think about it, but I don't know. I think I would need to give it another listen. It did remind me of something. It had that kind of punch, It had a very, it like just punches you in the gut. That riff, horn riff. But other than that, I didn't really associate it with that track. But I can see your point, though. I'll listen to it again and then let you know if that's the feeling I got.
It's kind of the same period, you know. Superstition was from 1972 and this was from 1974. So I guess they were just influenced by that music at that time, right?
I mean, a lot of, as I said, there's a lot of tropes in this kind of music, and it's very difficult to be unique and original. Stevie, for his money, was very original. I think he took that sound to another level, to another stratosphere. But rare are such artists, and I don't think Cold Blood is one of them. I think that what they did was just a perfect execution of R&B, soul, and funk music, and her vocals are just something to behold. I think that she deserved more fame solely for her singing, and she definitely deserves to be considered a diva of this kind of music.
There you go. All right, so I don't have anything else to add here. Really good instrumental work. Other songs as well, like "Ready to Live." It's a very sexy and funky song. Consideration has a great catchy riff, but that's kind of it. Towards the end, as we said multiple times, you just lose your focus. But overall, it's a very good record. And shall we now do the ratings, Vlada?
Yes, but I also want to mention, because I talked about the guitar player here, and I researched it a bit while you were talking. It's Paul Cannon, and his credits are really impressive. He played on the records by the likes of John Prine, Jerry Lee Lewis, uh, let me see, Eddie Floyd, another great soul singer, even Alex Chilton from Big Star. He even played on one of his records. So a really great instrumentalist, and I think it's really important for us to mention these unsung guitar heroes, because not everyone is Jimmy Page, and there were so many other guitar players that excelled, maybe even on the same level, but their playing was more subtle. They were session men. They didn't have their own band. So let's give some credit to such players. Paul Cannon is definitely one of them. So now about the ratings, I think I would give this one 7. So slightly worse maybe than the previous two records, solely because I felt that it was too slick for its own good. But other than that, I don't really have much to complain about. Lydia is in top form, perhaps even sounding more confident than on the previous records. And the highlight track for me is Under Pressure.
Okay, Vlad. Fair enough. I'm gonna give a higher rating. So, dear fans, dear Cold Blood fans, I'm now gonna save the day here and kind of cover myself up for all the stuff that I said previously. My rating is actually 8. 8 out of 10. I think this album just gave me something to enjoy. I think the riffs were much better, catchier. Definitely, something that I'm gonna go back to really soon. Why I wouldn't give it a higher rating than 8 is because of that repetitiveness that you can hear towards the end of the record. So 8 out of 10, and the highlight track here is the same, Under Pressure. And guys, please let me know if you also felt that this song had a riff that reminded you of Stevie Wonder's Superstition, the mega hit that we all know, especially if you're a fan of this kind of music. So, Vlada, we are now approaching the end of the episode. What's your final verdict on this, let's say, Patreon episode in a way?
My final verdict is that David's music taste is awesome, and thank you, David, for recommending this artist. I think that this is a kind of band that if you're into 60s music, if you're into the likes of Janis Joplin or Aretha Franklin, or soul and R&B music in general, you really need to check this out. And perhaps you will love it even more than we do because there's much to love here. Uh, the, these musicians are simply out of the world, out of this world. That is just nothing to add to that. I think that the only problem with these records is that they may not sound very original. It's not anything revolutionary, but it doesn't have to be for you to enjoy it. So check it out. If you love Janis, I think you will love this too.
Okay, Vlada, good words there. I'm kind of agreeing with you. It's not a revolutionary act. It's not something extraordinary, but it's definitely worth listening to. So, guys, I recommend listening to this band. I'll probably give them another chance, especially with the third record that we talked about today. But other than that, yeah. So before we go, we just want to give another shout out to our friends Tony and Matthew at Brown Dog Promos. You can contact them on their website, browndogpromos.com, or their social media accounts, facebook.com/browndogpromos, or on Instagram at browndogpromos.
Yes, guys, if you need any customized pens, lighters, t-shirt, or any of that sort, Tony and Matthew at Brown Dog Promos are your guys.
Don't forget to check out our social media accounts at Soundrise Pod, and also if you want to become a patron and also suggest your own bands, you can become a member of our Patreon community. Patreon.com/SoundrisePod. You can choose your tier and see all the benefits that go with each tier. All the best.
Write a review, and then you can share it
with the world in any social media platform.
And then your friends see it, and you can share and discover new shows together.
This is Steph, instigator of Pod Rev Day, Podcast Review Day.
And I'm Andy from Inspired Money.
And I'm Ariel of Earbuds Podcast Collective and Castbox.
We're here to tell you everything you need to know about Pod Rev Day,
which is on the 8th of every month, of every year, of every century, of every, you get it.
We are posting podcast reviews as part of hashtag PodRevDay, Podcast Review Day.
Because podcasters work their butts off and deserve to know how much they've impacted your lives. And you can do that through reviews.
Even 1 star feels surprisingly good.
Does
it? It lets you know that people are at least listening.
Don't be a passive podcast listener. Write a review and tell your favorite creator what you love about their podcast or about a specific episode.
And to participate, you just need to do 1 review.
And we'll see you every 8th of the month.
Pod Rev Day, because podcasters deserve to hear it.
Hashtag
Pod Rev Day. PODREVDAY.